Okay, so one of the things is we always have trouble defining, okay, what is quality. And I'll show you some rating scales that we have used and you also have on your pen drive. But here are some different definitions of quality, and I think everyone has an idea of what they mean by quality for their product. But you can see here, for example, the definitions, the degree of excellence or superiority, that might come from the dictionary, I think. Any of the features that make something that it is, the qualities, the sum, etc. So there's those are generally similar. Now you'll notice number 5, or absence of defects. So when we're dealing with fresh cut products, many times it's really not 1 through 4, it's more the other. We don't want the browning, we don't want any decay, that type of thing. So we're really defining the quality more in the absence of the defects. No? But it becomes important to, even if it's hard for us to kind of generally define quality, to specify what we mean by quality in our case. Now again, I'll show you a few examples. So quality sometimes can be difficult to define. But for me, for these products, one of the things that's harder to define is what do we mean by freshness? Okay, so everybody is fresh. I'm thinking of several companies, fresh this, fresh that. Okay, we've talked about fresh products, fresh cut produce. So we use the word fresh a lot, but that is one that even is less well defined. Yeah, and so I think that's one that we have to think a little bit more about is what does that word mean, the concept of fresh, okay? Of course, it's tied with quality. Now, this is an older slide. Christine Brun showed something similar this morning. I continue to use this one because as far as I know, the big important factors haven't changed over these years. This was put out in 1990, okay? What do we look for? Appearance, freshness, whatever that means, ripeness if it's a case of fruit, and taste and flavor. And I think everyone would agree here that in recent years, we really have begun seriously to pay more attention about taste and flavor. And we're going to have, in the last few years, we have had talks about sensory evaluation, and Ann Plato will be talking about that. And we also have a talk about aroma biology, because again, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we didn't have those talks. But again, more and more interest in taste and flavor as a component of quality. So Deidre was talking about pre-harvest factors and things, and so I just want to say a couple things here about raw material quality. Because as she mentioned, really many of the aspects of the preparation, production, packaging, etc., are very well delineated for these products. But the raw material quality is still the bane of the industry, the lack of consistency, etc. No? And so one of the important things to have high quality fresh cut product is to make sure that not all produce is perfect, right? So we all know it can vary. But to make sure that we, in our reception of raw material, distinguish between defects that will affect the post-harvest life of the fresh product or the fresh cut product, and those that definitely will affect, and those that will not affect. So here's a listing of just a few. So the ones on the left really have no bearing on the shelf life of the product, okay, as fresh produce or fresh cut. Those on the right are the types of things, and the list is longer, that will have a bearing on fresh cut produce. So I would just say to each of you, if you think about your product, whether you have clearly delineated which of those defects that you might score for, you might be evaluating, which of those really are more critical than others, okay? Because some of them are, strictly more superficial, etc. No, right? So I'm sure you all have a very good hand on that. Sort of general concepts about quality. If you're a grower, you define quality or you think about it, if you're a grower or a producer of the product, differently than if you're a handler. And again, this is more for standpoint of fresh produce, but the same thing sort of applies to fresh cut. In other words, our criteria, depending where we are in the value chain of the fresh cut products, is really quite different, right? Okay. So one of the key things is, and we just had the discussion about lettuce, right? Maturity of lettuce. So for me, one of the key things is making sure we harvest at the correct maturity for the purpose for which the product is, right? And that goes for vegetables or fruits. We often think about this for fruits, and I'm going to use an example of melons, for example, yeah? But it's really important for everything. Is it at the right maturity then to meet the requirements of the fresh cut product that we are processing, okay? So here's just one example for melons, because through the years I've done a lot of work with melons, and this continues to be an issue, okay? So the point here is that we've harvested melons at 2 stages, okay? Here happens to be a USDA inspector out in the field, and they're checking melon maturity, okay? On the right. Okay, But here we have 2 stages, and in this case, we're not using soluble solids measurements, although commercially that's what we would do. Use a refractometer, measure the soluble solids, right? Because that's an easy thing to do. And it turns out that the sugars and the refractometer readings are fairly well correlated, but we actually measured the sugar content here. So we have class 1, that was a melon that was fully developed, no slip, but certainly could be harvested commercially, okay? So, you know, well within acceptable range. And then we have class 2 where the melon is beginning to slip. In other words, the stem is beginning to separate from the fruit, which is a good harvest criteria, maturity index for melons. So what do you notice about that graph? So these are actual fresh cut pieces then that were made from the melons, and we're looking at the changes in the sugar content with time at 5 degrees Celsius or 41. So what do you notice? What does that graph tell you? Which fresh cut pieces would you prefer to eat? The ones from the green or the ones from the orange? The orange. Why? Higher sugar. And what happened with time? It decreased. It decreased in both cases, right? But the ones that started with a higher sugar always had higher sugar at any given point. So that is just one simple example of why maturity can be very important, and especially fruits. I really, you know, I look at like mangoes, papayas, you know, some of the fruit products, melons, okay? You know, many times we're trying to gain the firmness and shelf life, okay, at the expense of really good eating quality, and it's all related with the maturity or the ripeness, the stage of ripeness at which they're being cut, okay? So that's just one simple example.